What's up, everybody? Okay, so it's just me tonight. Tiffany's not here. What are we going to get into? So I'm sure you're all aware that they've told us that rates are going to come down by now, and they just haven't. And so tonight we're going to spend some time talking a little bit about where rates actually are, because I think it's really important. We touched on it on our last live video, but I want to go a little more in depth as to where rates are and give you a little perspective on that. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the real payment, which what is it actually costing at $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 home? What is it actually going to look like? And then we're going to talk a little bit about rent versus buy, because I know some of you are in that position as well. We're going to talk a little bit about the math on waiting. What is it costing you to wait? What does it cost you if you don't buy now and you wait? And I know a lot of people reach out to us and they say, well, why would I buy now? I have a low rate. I don't want to sell and then buy, or I don't want to buy because rates are high and I want them to come down. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're also going to talk about builder buy downs and the build advantage. And then we'll wrap up. And I really just want to know from all of you, where are you in this process? So, where are you looking? Are you looking in the Carolina Forest area, North Myrtle, Surfside, Myrtle's Inlet? And maybe I can speak to those areas as we go. But, everybody has talked about that rates are going to drop, and we're going to get into that, and we're going to have some fun. So even though Tiffany's not here, it's always better when Tiffany's here, but of course we're going to have a great time. I'm going to do my best. So happy early 4th to everybody. And with that, let's kind of get into it. So I don't want to get too deep into, I love to talk about this topic, and I love following what's going on with the Fed rates, and where we're at with the economy, what's causing all the challenges in the economy and what's coming, in the future. But at the end of the day, what I realized, and I realized this a while ago, that no one really knows. And so we can all speculate as to what we think is coming, but none of us really know. And so when somebody gets up there and they say, here's what's coming and here's what's going to happen, you have to take that with a grain of salt. I'm not saying that they're wrong, but I don't think anybody really knows. And that's the bottom line. So what has actually happened? Well, as of this morning, the 30-year fixed rate is sitting in the mid to upper sixes. And after the Fed's June meeting, the story has kind of flipped. And a majority of the Fed officials are now signaling the next move might be up, not down. Now, there's some people that think that the rates will not go up. And, we really don't know. I could see how they can make a case that rates will be going up, but we just don't know. But the bottom line here, I think, really for all of you and tonight, is to just make the assumption that they're going to be in the sixes. And the reason why I say that is because everybody that I can find that does any sort of rate prediction, whether it's the Mortgage Bankers Association, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, NAR, whoever, they're all basically on the same page that rates are pretty much going to be in the sixes. And I think the big consensus is not major moves. And so that's what we're going to kind of get into tonight. But I just want to make sure we're all starting with that premise. But if you don't know, I'm Frank Harita with the Harita team at Carolina Crafted Homes. As I said, Tiffany's not joining us tonight, but she'll be back next week. And basically what we do is we help people buy homes. We help people sell homes, build homes, renovate homes. We also have short-term oceanfront rental property management. So we do a little bit of everything. And so, we're not lenders. So I'm just saying that up front because I don't want anyone to be like, wait a second, you said this. Look, we're just going to use estimates tonight. I'm going to try and be as close as I can. I'm going to tell you what I use to estimate so you have a good idea. But we're not lenders. And everything we use, taxes, insurance, the payments vary by buyer and property. And we're going to talk about that. I'll say that again later, but I just want to make sure that everybody understands. And none of this includes HOA, flood, and that kind of stuff. So let's get into it and talk a little bit. So we talked about where rates actually are. The 30-year fix is in the mid sixes. And a year ago, it was around, I think 6.8. So we're actually a little better than last summer. I would say we're pretty close to the same, even though it doesn't feel like it, right? So, but the part that nobody's telling you is that the experts no longer agree with each other. And that's the real story. So on one side, you have the housing forecasters, Fannie Mae, MBA, they still think rates are going to drift low to mid sixes through the rest of the year. And on the other side, you have the Fed's own committee that's more hawkish, but they're split kind of. So after their June meeting, most officials think the next rate move could be a hike, and we'll see what happens. But let's gain some historical perspective so we know exactly what we're talking about. So I think it matters. So since they started tracking mortgage rates back in 1971, the median rate is about 7.23. And that means that today's mid sixes actually below they're normal, right? They're below the long run normal, I guess you could say. So I think the record low was 2.65, insane. That was a pandemic anomaly, obviously. And that's it's not coming back around. And I think that's also one of the main points I want to drive home is, the record high was 18.63, and that was back in 1981. And I could go over a lot of data that talks about like, hey, even when the rates were 18.6%, how many of you, what I'd really love to know is how many of you were actually around when rates were 18.6%? And did you actually buy a home when rates were 18.6%? But I believe that most people don't even know that happened. And especially when you're a younger buyer. And I'm not saying because you just don't know. I mean, why would you think to do that? You've got a job, you've got a life. You're not going to go back and take a look at this. But the bottom line is that you have to put everything in perspective. And the real normal is the 6 point whatever we're at right now, right? The 6.8 or the 6.5, that's the normal. What's not normal is the 2.65. Right? So you could make a case that the extremes on both ends, the 18 point whatever and the 2 point whatever, those are the extremes. Those are the not normal, right? The normal is in the median where you're in the sevens, the sixes, that's normal. And so I think that everybody just has to understand, okay, this isn't like a catastrophe that rates are in the sixes. So the honest reframe here is that 6.5% isn't the weird number. The 3% was the weird number. And we're closer to normal than most people probably realize. So I'm just interested to know what your forced mortgage was, what your rate was. If you did have a mortgage during the 80s, I think it's super interesting to me. And I haven't seen rates. Geez, I'm going to be 50 and in November. And I don't think that, obviously before I was, when I was younger in the 80s, that's when the rates were the highest. But since I was able to buy a home, rates have pretty much been in the sevens, sixes, maybe 8, but that's it. That's the worst I've seen in my lifetime when, as a buyer. So anyway, it's important to understand what a normal rate is. So, okay, let's talk a little bit now about real payments. Okay. So we don't want to talk theory. We want to put real payments. And this is where Horry County actually works in your favor, which is the county here in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And most people don't have any idea. So in South Carolina, if it's your primary residence, your property tax is calculated at a 4% assessment ratio. And the school operating tax gets credited off. So that means that there's an effective property tax rate of roughly about 1/3% of your home's value. Okay. So to put it in plain English, on a $330,000 primary home, you're looking at around $1,150 a year in property tax. Now, that's one of the lowest effective property tax burdens in the entire country, okay? But there's one catch. So primary residence here is 4%. Second home rentals are 6%. The low rate is for your primary residence, and it's not automatic. And this is what we have to have a talk with our clients, and we've talked about this before as well. You have to file a legal residence application within the county. Second homes and rentals are taxed at 6%, which can run 2 to 3 times higher. So if you're buying a beach place as a second home, you need to budget for that. But on the flip side, the coastal reality is insurance. And so we are on the ocean here, and it costs more than if you're inland. But the good news for new construction is that newer homes with newer roofs, and roofs, I'm not sure how you say it, but newer roofs sounds normal to me. And current wind codes, they tend to be better than older homes. And so you're going to find that better insurance rates on newer homes, especially when they're built current building codes and things of that nature. Hurricane rated. We also have something that's gold fortified, it's called, where, they have these requirements. If you build to that standard, then it can give you a break on the price of your insurance. But let's just take a look on a $300,000 home. You are around, now this is, if you're putting it all together, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, estimates for your primary residence on a 30-year fixed, this is 10% down. So don't reach out to me and say these quotes aren't right. This is just estimates. So on a $300,000 home, a 30-year fixed, 10% down is around $1,980 a month. A $400,000 home would be about $2,600, and a $500,000 home would be around $3,250. Okay. Now, we're talking somewhere between 6.52 and 648. So, and for anyone frozen because the rate, ticked up a little bit, like 1/100th of a point or something, on a $400,000 loan, the difference between 6.48 interest rate and 6.52 is about $6 a month. So don't let that freeze up your decision. And I really think that this is an important point tonight, because there's a lot of you out there that are wondering, well, what should I do? Should I actually purchase? What if rates go up? What if rates go down? And I think it really depends on the position you're in your life. We've talked about this as well. I am not going to sit here and say that you need to buy a home. I think everybody should own a home, but timing matters. And so you don't want to put yourself in a really tight spot just to go buy a home. But I think for most people, and look, we can have these debates over whether homes are worth the investment or if they're not. And, most people, they're not going to save money and all this other stuff. But I believe that most people are not going to save their money. They're going to spend it. So when you buy a home, what we say is it's a form of forced savings. Okay. And so if you buy a home and you pay money and you have a fixed mortgage, fixed rate mortgage, some of that money is going towards principal. And so we call it forced savings, because you're making that mortgage payment. And in the beginning, most of it goes to interest. But eventually, and even in the beginning, just a little bit, but you're saving. It's forced savings. You have to make that mortgage payment. And so some of that money is going towards principal or paying down the mortgage balance. And that is how you build equity. Okay. And so when you purchase a home, most people are not going to be disciplined enough to go out and invest in 401k or a retirement plan or the stock market or whatever. But when you have to make that mortgage payment, it's just automatic, which is what financial planners will recommend to you. Just do the same payment every single month and do small pieces, dollar cost average, right? And so that's why I think homeownership is a good investment. You can make the case in some places in America right now that it makes more sense to rent than buy. But we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. And I'm going to hopefully help you understand that sometimes that is not the case. So we will talk about that. All right. So now let's talk about the rent versus buy. So a lot of you are saying, but I think it's cheaper to just rent right now. And that's a fair question. That's a fair statement. But let's look at real numbers here. So right now, the average rent here is about $1,750 a month. And that's if you're doing a rental home, it's closer to about $2,300. But let's put that next to what we just saw. So a $300,000 primary home is around $1,980 a month. And that's less than renting a house. So you're building equity instead of building instead of building your landlord. So you're building your equity. But I'm going to be, straight with you on this because I think it's really interesting. I'd rather be accurate than sell you a story. Rents here have actually softened a little. And this is the case in a couple of areas, not a couple of many areas over the past year. And they're down probably around 3%. But I'm not going to tell you that, rent is skyrocketing. It's not. But what is still true is that rent is a payment that never ends, and it never builds you a single dollar. So a mortgage payment is a payment that's fixed for, a mortgage payment is a payment that is fixed for 30 years. And then one day it is gone. Now you could pay it off early and you can make extra payments and then it's gone earlier. But as long as you don't refi and you make your payments, and like you could also say that, you're paying more than you need to, and that's a fair statement. But your rent has no finish line. And so at least your mortgage has an end date. So, I'm interested, if you're renting right now, what are you paying? And are you putting together a plan to be able to buy a home? And I'm also interested in knowing, what is your largest struggle with trying to plan for a home? What exactly is it that you find is the toughest thing about making a plan? Is it the discipline of putting money aside so that you have a pool of money that you can use to purchase that home? I think that's interesting. I'm very passionate about the rent versus buy scenario because there is a cost to waiting. And again, not everybody should buy, but you should have a plan to buy, in my opinion, unless you're jet setting all over the world and you just are never at home. But whether it's a primary or an investment property, it's a great way to build wealth. And I love having these conversations. We won't go that deep tonight, but it's a great way to build wealth. But let's talk about the cost of waiting. So the big question everybody wants to know is, should I wait for rates to drop? Okay. And I am not in the business of prediction. If I was and I was good at it, then I'd be making a lot more money than I am now. But nobody who's honest, in my opinion, can tell you what's coming. If they do, and they say, this is for sure what's coming, then you need to run, because it's just not the case. But let's just go through the numbers again on this one. So if you've got a $400,000 loan at today's rate, it's about $2,528 a month in principal and interest. So let's say you wait and rates drop 0.5 point to 6%. And that same loan drops to about $2,398. You just saved $130 a month. And that sounds great. But here is the piece that people forget. Forecasters currently project that home prices here are up around 3% this year. If that plays out, the house you waited on isn't 400,000 anymore. It's around 412. Run that at 6% and your $130 in savings shrinks to about 58. Meanwhile, you paid rent the whole time you waited. And so the kicker here is that you can refinance later if rates drop, but you may not be able to renegotiate a purchase price. And I think that's the scariest piece about this whole thing. You don't want to, I'm not telling you to buy today again, but you don't want to wait on a number that experts can't agree is even coming. And that's, I kind of feel like, what's happening. But a lot of people are like, well, I'm just going to wait till rates drop. And I'm not against that. But what if you're wrong? What if you're wrong and you can get in now? Some of you can't. I get it. You just shouldn't do it. Maybe it's too much. You can't find a home in the city that you live. But here's another scenario for you. If you live in a place where it's really expensive, let's just say you live in California, or let's just say you live in New York, and it's really expensive there. Maybe what you should do is you should buy a property somewhere else in a state that's more affordable. Start with something out there. Maybe you still have to rent where you live. There's lots of different scenarios. The biggest piece of advice that I can give is talk to a professional in the area you want to buy, in the area you live, and help them, let them help you figure out what your options are. That's what we love to do. I love doing that. I like to say, okay, let's just sit down and go over the options. Unless you know you want to buy or you want to sell, what are your options if you rent versus buy, right? Does it make sense to rent or does it not? And a lot of times I find that it doesn't, but sometimes you just don't have a choice, and that's okay. But part of the plan should be, let's make a plan so that to get me to where I can buy. All right. And that's really what this is about. Okay. So now let's talk about some different programs. Specifically, I think builder buy downs, because that gives you an advantage with a new builder. And I think that's important right now in this market. So this is generally useful right now. And builders will sometimes offer a rate buy down. And let's talk about how that works on a $400,000 loan. So instead of paying the full rate day one, the builder buys your rate down for the first 2 years. So year one, your payment feels like a 4.5% rate, which could be a little over $2,000 a month. Year two, it steps up to about $2,271. And then year three and beyond, you're at full payment around $2,500. Okay. That gives you a soft landing while you settle in. And it can cost the builder around, it could be, the numbers change, but around $9,000 to fund that. So a resale seller almost never does that for you. So a builder oftentimes will. And that's just so they can move a home because they might have a spec and they need to get some sales. They have numbers they have to hit, especially the publicly traded companies, even the private ones, but especially the publicly traded ones. So this is exactly where we live when it comes down to this, right? So we talk to builders all the time. We're actually sitting down and we're talking about, hey, okay, what are the options for our buyers? Now, there are other programs. And, I get the comment all the time from buyers and sellers and just people in general. And they're always talking about, they're saying, oh my gosh, market crash. This is going to happen. Market's going to crash. Now, I'm not saying that something with the war could cause this other problem that then could cause an indirect effect. And then there's a housing issue, right? That's out of everybody's control. No one knows what's going to happen. But what's not going to happen is we don't have right now a lot of distressed sellers. And actually, believe it or not, the job market isn't bad, shockingly, based on what's going on with the war. That could change. But you need a lot of distressed sellers to have a problem in the housing market. And we just don't have that. In fact, what we have and what we see is individuals with record amounts of equity. Record amounts. So they have record amounts of equity, and that means that they don't have to move anywhere. And if they do, they can sell and they have a bunch of money to do it. So we have a lot of people that come here from up north and they're paying cash for their home, anywhere from $800,000 to over $1 million. And I forget the exact number. I have it somewhere on my computer here, but it's around 50 or 60% of people that own a home have 50% equity in their home, something around that number. It's really kind of crazy. And that's much different than what everybody thinks we might be going through, because they keep comparing it to the GFC, and it's nothing like that when it comes to that specific situation. You can make a case for different markets with different inventory rates, but here in Myrtle Beach, it's just not the case. People have record amounts of equity, and we still have people moving here. And I'm also a real estate coach, and I talk to real estate agents all across the country every single week. And what I find interesting is when I hear from somebody that, oh my gosh, the market's really not that great here. And I'll say, tell me more. And what they'll say is, well, homes are selling in 60 days or 30 days. And that's a gift, my friends. Homes selling that fast on market on average is really good. When it's 9 months, 6 months, that's a much different story. And that is not the case. Now, I'm not saying it's not the case in some markets. Most markets, though, in the United States, it's not that way. You have your pockets. You have pockets where home prices appreciated more than others. Actually, South Carolina, I think we had from 2021, I saw a report from 2021 to 2026, we were probably top 5 as states who saw the most appreciation in homes during that time. And I think the number was 52%. 52. Then there was a couple other states that were 58 and somewhere around 62, and 73, I believe, was the highest, which is really interesting. That is unheard of. We went through one of the greatest, if not the greatest, real estate cycle anyone has ever seen through COVID, which no one could have seen that coming. But the bottom line is, what are you going to do about rates? And you have to make a decision. Before you make that decision, you need to make a plan. And so my recommendation is to make a plan. Figure out what's important to you. What is the time you want to be in a home? Maybe you're downsizing. Maybe you're upsizing. Maybe you're maybe you just got engaged and you're going to get married and you're thinking about starting a family. Maybe you had 2 kids when you bought your home and there's only 2 bedrooms and you need a third. Maybe you're looking to downsize because the kids are out and you're empty nesters. We help everybody in all those situations. We also help investors that are like, hey, I want to get a good return, which is very difficult to find these days, but you can find it. You just have to look at more properties. So patience comes into play a little more. But the bottom line is, when it comes to rates, you have to make a decision. What are you going to do? And you have to understand what all the costs are. So you have to talk to a great lender and you have to have a great real estate professional to help you out. So at the end of the day, the bottom line is it's not a bad time to buy and it's not a bad time to sell either. It could be good for both, but sellers, their problem is a lot of them aren't realistic. And if you're going to put your home on the market, you have to be stepping forward with, your home has to look great. You can't have it cluttered. You can't do the things. You can't not do the things that you need to do to get top dollar. This is not that market. But interest rates probably are going to stay in the 6s. That's pretty much what everybody's saying. And even if they raise them or lower them, they're still going to be there unless they do something drastic. And no one can really see that taking place right now. We all hope that would be great. But right now, they're probably going to stay in the 6s. So the bottom line is work the numbers, lean on the data, take a look at the numbers, take a look at the data and understand exactly how is this going to change my payment if I purchase at this price, and then what's the chances that I can refi in the future, or can I? Make sure you can afford it. You don't want to be house poor. That is something you definitely want to consider. Let me check and make sure. Anybody have any questions? Please let me know where you're watching from when you watch this. Tell me what questions you have. I'm always interested to understand what exactly and what kind of a interest rate do you have now? I always find this interesting. It's funny how people are like, oh my gosh, the first thing anybody says when we talk about homes nowadays is, oh my gosh, my rate's 2.576. Why? I can't move. Why would I move? And it's true. It's really just crazy that we're all talking about rates and numbers that are that low. So my ask is that you stop waiting on a headline. Let's run your actual number, your price point, your down payment. Is it a primary or is it a secondary home? And let's see what the real payment looks like for you. Okay. And we have our contact information, so you can send us a message. You can call or text anytime. The number is 704-910-9111. You can text us, or you can email us, info@carolinacraftedhomes.com, or you can head to our website, carolinacraftedhomes.com, for listings, home valuations, our guides for buyers, sellers, and investors. And we are always here to help. And like I said, we're not lenders, but we're always going to give you the straight math, because that's the most important thing. So if you have any questions, reach out. We're always excited to help you. And I hope that this helped a little bit by going through what your mortgage payment would be based on a certain price point with 10% down and at the price point. But if you have specific questions past this, let's get you in touch with one of our lenders, and we'll work out the math for you. Do it together. We're looking forward to helping you. All right, everybody. If you have any other questions, reach out. We'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.